It would have been great if this process of 4 days of hearings for Judge Gorsuch could have been made available for Judge Merrick Garland as well. I think the irony is that it was not. And to hear my colleagues talk about how the Democratic senators or the Democrats are afraid of being primaried, please. That hardly even bears any kind of response from us. Over the past 2 months, Donald Trump has nominated a parade of extreme and unqualified people to important government positions. We have an education secretary who doesn't even believe in public education, a Treasury secretary who profited from the 2008 mortgage crisis, Environmental Protection Agency administrator who seems to not believe in environmental protection. I could go on. So when Donald Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch to serve on the Supreme Court, you could almost hear an audible gasp of relief. President Trump didn't nominate a member of his family. He didn't nominate a television personality. He nominated a Columbia and Harvard-educated lawyer with 10 years of experience on the circuit court. But we cannot and should not evaluate Judge Gorsuch on the basis of, I have to say, the very low bar that President Trump has established for his nominees. Paper credentials are not enough. This is for the highest court of the land, a lifetime appointment, a court that makes decisions that impacts all of our lives. And should Judge Gorsuch get nominated, he will be on that court long before a lot of us are gone. And we should not give Judge Gorsuch a pass just because he has these credentials. Judge Gorsuch's nomination is a product of a year-long campaign by extreme right-wing organizations to continue to transform the Supreme Court in its image, in their image. During the campaign, President Trump had a clear litmus test for his Supreme Court nominee. To paraphrase, he wanted someone who would overturn Roe v. Wade, prioritize the religious freedom of a corporation over the rights of its employees, and upholds an expansive view of the Second Amendment. With this direction, the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society prepared a list of 21 judges who would meet the president's litmus test and their conservative requirements. For the first time ever, the President of the United States turned over, proudly, his constitutional duty to nominate a Supreme Court justice to conservative right-wing groups. Over the past month and a half, these groups and their secret funders have spent over $10 million to support this nomination. No doubt because their donors have confidence about how Judge Gorsuch will rule on so many of the tough cases that will come before the Supreme Court. It's why I've been so persistent, along with my colleagues on this side of the aisle, in asking him questions to get a sense of what his judicial philosophy would be. This is a critically important question to answer before we decide to give Judge Gorsuch a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land, from which there is no appeal. These are the kinds of serious questions I would ask of any nominee, whether the nominee had been one of a Democratic or a Republican president. But when I asked Judge Gorsuch serious questions to understand his judicial philosophy, he told us that his words, his views, his writings, and his clearly expressed personal views in the past had no relevance to what he would do as a justice. During the hearing, many of my Republican colleagues echoed the same view. They said that credentials are enough and that our real questions about Judge Gorsuch's record and philosophy were somehow irrelevant or even inappropriate or unfair. But this argument, just like the well-funded campaign by right-wing groups to confirm Neil Gorsuch, obscures the real stakes. It obscures the real impact of Judge Gorsuch's record of favoring corporations over individual rights. It obscures the very idea of what it means to be a justice on the Supreme Court. In my view, we should evaluate this nomination with the clear understanding that there is a great deal of difference between how a Justice Gorsuch would approach the kind of tough cases that comes before the Supreme Court and say what a Justice Merrick Garland would do. Does judicial philosophy matter? Of course it does. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so many 5-4 Supreme Court decisions that impact millions of lives. And to illustrate, we know that Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg, both legendary jurists and actually close friends, they used to go to the opera together, would reach dramatically different results in cases that matter deeply in the lives of millions. Cases like Shelby County, like Citizens United, like Lilly Ledbetter, like Hobby Lobby, like Roe v. Wade. For the people who need justice most urgently, a justice's view of the law can make a world of difference. The working families, women, differently abled, people of color, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, students, seniors, and our Native peoples, these are the people who will be impacted by the decision a Justice Gorsuch would make. Yet an understanding of these people, their lives, and how the court's decisions would impact them is what I found to be missing from Judge Gorsuch's view of the law, even though he told me that the purpose of Article III courts, the federal courts, is to protect minority rights. For example, the narrow interpretation Judge Gorsuch took on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, would have left Luke Perkins and thousands of special needs children like him without a chance to make real educational progress. The Supreme Court unanimously rejected and criticized Judge Gorsuch's narrow standard in a case just 2 weeks ago. His standard was too much, even for Justice Roberts. In the case of Alphonse Madden, Judge Gorsuch's narrow approach to the law was content to leave Mr. Madden with a terrible choice between freezing to death or being fired. And Judge Gorsuch's decision in Hobby Lobby found an expansive new right to religious liberty for a corporation that employs thousands of people. I always thought it was odd that people would describe Hobby Lobby as a family-owned business when they actually employed over 20,000 people all across the country. His decision made no assessment of the terrible impact this decision had for the thousands of working women at the Hobby Lobby company who would now be denied access to contraceptive coverage. A careful reading of Judge Gorsuch's decisions reveal a pattern of being on the side of corporations and against the side of individuals, continuing the clear propensity of the Roberts Court to support corporate interests over individual rights. We can see this when he narrows the law in ways at odds with the law's purpose and well past the point of common sense, such as in the trucker case, or when he throws up his hands and tells Congress to do better next time if we disagree with his narrow reading of relevant law. There are plenty of credentialed judges and smart judges, but credentials are not enough, not for the Supreme Court, or any court for that matter that makes decisions that impact so many lives. We have also heard the argument that the Democratic opposition to Judge Gorsuch's nomination is somehow unfair in contrast to Republican treatment of President Obama's Supreme Court nominees. It is hard to believe that anybody can make these arguments with a straight face. Every Republican on this committee, except for Senator Graham, opposed the nominations of both Justices Sotomayor and Kagan. These arguments omit any mention of President Obama's third Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland, the moderate, well-credentialed, well-respected Chief Judge of the D.C. Circuit. Yet though his nomination was pending for nearly a year, he was never given a hearing, let alone a vote, and many Republican senators did not even extend the courtesy of meeting with Judge Garland. Senate Republicans kept the seat open for a year after Justice Scalia's death in an unprecedented, arrogant act. Apparently, President Obama's nominee didn't even deserve the kind of hearing that we have accorded to Judge Gorsuch. In fact, several Republican senators suggested during the campaign that they would be comfortable keeping this seat on the Supreme Court open and for more 4-4 decisions for another 4 years if Hillary Clinton had gotten elected. Now that Donald Trump is president, has made his pick, Senate Republicans have rediscovered their sense of urgency in filling this seat. They have argued that it is an improper abuse or even a personal affront to Judge Gorsuch if we don't rally to confirm him and do it lickety-split. I have serious concerns about the plans by the Senate's Republican leadership to jam this nomination through more quickly than for any recent Supreme Court nominee. Majority Leader McConnell's intention is to confirm Judge Gorsuch by the end of this week, and he has said he would do this one way or another. Judge Gorsuch will be confirmed per Majority Leader McConnell, the same person who said we will have no hearings on Merrick Garland. So this vote would come after only 4 days of floor debate, less time than for any Supreme Court nominee, dating back to at least 1975, far short of the 13 days on average the Senate takes to debate a Supreme Court nomination. Having left the seat open for almost a year and with the stakes of this lifetime appointment so high for the American people, people might rightly ask, why the rush? Why force the issue and create a crisis? Why not, in the best tradition of the Senate, allow for serious debate around such a critical nomination? From reports, it seems that part of the answer is that Judge Gorsuch's supporters, including the right-wing groups who have launched a $10 million campaign on his behalf, want him on the court by the middle of this month in time to hear a particular case called Trinity Lutheran Church v. Pauley. They want him to rule on this case which would tear down important, long-standing barriers protecting our constitutional separation of church and state. This undermines all the right-wing protestations that Judge Gorsuch's approach to the law and judicial philosophy don't matter. Judge Gorsuch's supporters want him on the court to hear a particular case with major ramifications, and they clearly have a very good idea of how this nominee, their nominee who was selected by them, would rule. Just as they are confident he meets their litmus tests and the litmus tests of the president who nominated him. This is no reason to rush our consideration or deny the Senate and the American people the time for a serious debate on this nomination. Doing so would undermine our constitutional role of advice and consent. A Supreme Court vacancy isn't just another position we must fill in our federal judiciary. A Supreme Court vacancy is a solemn obligation we owe to future generations. The central question for me, in looking at Judge Gorsuch and his record, in listening carefully through 4 days of hearings, is whether he would be a justice for all of us or a justice for some. I do not believe Judge Gorsuch will be a justice for all of us. I will not support his nomination.